24. That's the number of Survivor auctions that have existed. Today, I'll be, as far as I know, the first YouTuber to rank every Survivor auction from the US to the Kiwis, from down under to the Safas. For me, I like my auctions to be competitive, have iconic moments, a good range of emotions, well paced, and importantly exciting. I don't want a bland auction. With that all covered, let's dive into the video. Survivor South Africa Philippines takes the bottom spot, and it's ironic that this is one of my favourite Survivor seasons of all time, and I completely forgot it had an auction. That should pretty much tell you my opinions of this. There are a few fun moments, however small they may be, like Tom exploding with joy after realising the covered item he was dreading was donuts, and Sean has a pretty enjoyable interaction with Nico, dreamingly scraping the chicken off the bone. But apart from that, this auction is pretty bland. At 23, I have Palau. Not a standout auction, but we do have some moments like Greg really wanting a bite of food from Ian's plate, Stephanie plus Karen sniffing the covers for food under them, and Jen asking in the background once the auction is over if they can't have the leftover cheese and crackers. I also love Ian's dilemma with Jeff pulling out this ridiculous reinforced box and asking Ian if he'd like to switch, which he obviously doesn't. While it has a few more standout moments, they are comparatively small to the other auctions, and this season's auction has a lot of uninteresting moments. Zooming into 22 is Tocantins. Know that word choice was intentional, as a good portion of this auction is chopped up, leaving us as the viewer zooming from round to round, harming the overall pace in my opinion, further accentuated by there only being 5 items for 6 people. But there's a few fun quotes from this auction, such as Debbie not knowing what increments of 20 means despite being a principal, and Taj pulling the arm off Jeff after some prodding from him about her loved one seeing her back at camp. We also have Aaron shrieking at Steven's chicken hearts, a food he pretends to love. But yeah, you're not fooling anyone, Steven. When people want the auction to return, I tell them yeah, but don't make it like Australian Survivor Blood vs Water. For good reason. This is one of the most game body auctions out there, really providing the flaws of a modern day auction with advantages. We see at this auction that Jordan gets a chicken parm with a beer, only for JLP to pull out his own beer bottle, cheers Jordan, and drink the beer almost off screen. However, we see a lot of hyper strategic gameplay, with the majority putting $500 bids on covered items the minority are bidding for. And it's clear they're only holding on to their money for this purpose. We have interestingly Josh retracting his bid after bidding $500 at the same time as David, and Chrissy in her wacky ways are adamant about Jordy bidding on an egg under the cover for some reason. The auction ends on a sour note, however, with Shay buying a letter from home, only to have one of these dilemmas I don't like from a game or entertainment standpoint, forcing a cheap twist of a moral dilemma wherein she can keep her letter or give it up so someone else can have them. Sure, they do this with food as well, but it's a letter from home. It's far more important. It ends on a sour note and is mostly filled with robots, so it's outside of the top 20. The final South Africa season we'll be covering is the Maldives. Much like Tocantins, there are only 5 items for 7 people, which is insane, and its editing is also fast paced, but I think this end product is slightly better. We have some fun moments like Bonnie's dance as she gets an advantage over the angelic music, as well as Tejan spending $500 just on a milkshake with a pretty unique twist, where the tribe had 60 seconds to drink it, but there weren't enough straws to go around for everyone. This adds into Tejan's arc, however, where the very next item is a car that Allison gets. The presentation here is hilarious, where she doesn't understand it's a car key, even with Nico's probing. But again, another short auction that's pretty unremarkable. Past that is Survivor Guatemala, and we start out with Danny getting beef jerky for $20, which you can tell annoyed Jeff. but two moments are noteworthy, such as Lydia getting a mosquito net and her cringy chat with Jeff about the bites in her booty, as well as an intense final showdown between Judd and Stephanie, counting up their money to see who will get their loved one. This provides a nice crescendo to the end of the auction, with Judd giving family to Cindy, who lent him money, and Stephanie, which is obviously impactful outside the auction, particularly at the final tribal. But despite the positives, there's still better to come. After that is the originator of the auction, Survivor Australia. This auction is handled far more differently than all the others, with a distinct corny vibe to it as a result of the weird music and Roger plus Amber getting odd ad-libs.
Wow!
Much like the entire Borneo season, the editors clearly didn't know what to do with it, although it's still not bad as a product. Part of the fascination comes from the incredibly small portions, however. It's amusing seeing Jeff overselling the likes of 4 Doritos. Though we do get opening bids which reduce the competitive bidding. Elizabeth has a noteworthy moment of getting peanut butter and chocolate, then saying something not so PG, poorly masked by a thunderstorm sound effect, and Amber tries to throw the river water over Jeff, both of which gave me a chuckle. While I have respect for it being the first auction, it has its noticeable flaws and is skipped over a bit. Perhaps controversially, I put Worlds Apart in 17th, but it in itself is a controversial season. This auction has 3 highlighted moments, and pretty much everything else is whizzed past. Will buys a covered item first, and I love the line where he says it's probably grilled ass or something, but he opens the cover to reveal he bought himself out of the auction. A twist I don't like. And I wish if they were going to use the quote-unquote unfortunate dilemma, that they would use something like Australian Survivor's beggar table. More on that soon. The other 2 parts of the auction shown are people gaming it. Again, not my tea. Sharon breaks the auction by getting everyone letters from home for $20, although it does lead to Mike's dilemma of not taking the letter to keep his $500, causing Dan Foley semi-off camera to proclaim he didn't do it. And then the last part of the auction are 3 people going to Rocks for an extra vote. Sure, it has iconic moments, but it lacks many of the elements I choose to watch an auction for. Past that is Survivor Philippines. Immediately Denise buys a breakfast meal for $500, then is critiqued by Scoopin, stating she could get that for $1.99 at the local diner, only to immediately bid $500 on cheese and wine. And he doesn't even drink. We also have some subplots like Carter being a provider for the tribe, as well as Abby being alone on the bottom. Say what you will about Abby, but this auction would have been pretty bland without her, and I love her line of, "There is no compassion towards me, so I need to have compassion towards myself." A pretty standard auction overall, and with most people bidding up to $500 early on, it prevents a lot of the competitive bidding. In 15th, ironically, we have the season just after, Caramoan. We begin strong with Malcolm wanting to keep his money, only to immediately bid on beer and snacks. Cochran has Monty Hall spiel, made even more funny by the fact it wasn't even a Monty Hall problem Reynolds was posed. While I like the switch up of advantages, this time with the idol clue having a 60-second re-period, the execution was poor, as the same parchment was literally available later to contestants, without a time period. We have the arc of Brenda scared to bid in case it's something bad, only to commit to a covered item which turns out to be a pig brain. The auction has a funny finale with everyone freaking out about the giant tub of peanut butter, and then there's Malcolm asking production how they even got it in there. Finally, we have Jeff and Cochran's bromance, as Jeff asks him how often he's licked a woman's finger after licking Sherry's, and he replies, "More often than you think." Now at 14th is Cagayan. Now, Cagayan is a tale of 2 halves for me. In one aspect, you have so many iconic one-liners from this auction, with Jeffrey's holy guacamole, Wu's get a fat dip of that guac line, and Trish's comment about the cast being cheapo depots. But that really is the main issue. Barely anybody bids. Most items go within the first or second rounds, as Tony, Spencer and Tasha all make it apparent they're waiting for an advantage. This is really where the auction nosedives, with Jeff realising it too, as he asks Spencer if he was ever buying food, and he tells him no. And sure, there are fantastic moments in this auction, but they're also caught up with confessionals from Spencer and Tony, just telling us they're holding out for an advantage, something they literally tell Jeff later in the auction. The first tribe auction occurs next, with Australian Survivor All-Stars taking 2 tribes, giving them $2,000 overall, however, keeping bidding individual, which creates a selfish versus selfless dynamic I really like. We begin the auction with Makuta trying to ration their money, only for Phoebe, voted out the last tribal, to throw a spanner in the works and spend $500 immediately on what turns out to be a table for 2, and she picks AK from the other tribe. And this auction is really carried by Phoebe's brute snarkiness, as well as Jonathan role-playing as an overly polite waiter that sips some of their margarita. We have a heartwarming moment from Nick seeing his 8-month-old baby, especially because in season 1 he didn't get much personal content due to him being the snake. John buys a pizza only for the next item to be his favourite food, a chicken parm, so he throws a slice of pizza into the air and starts bidding against Lockie on his own tribe for it, which is absolutely hilarious. While it has some fantastic standout moments, there are also some slow points with people just simply buying food, so the middle seems fair. Coming into 12 is Gabon, a season renowned for its craziness, and this auction is no exception. This auction is very much bolstered by Randy, who is involved in a lot of the big moments and aggressively bids against pretty much everyone. By the end, he tries to designate who gets how many cookies each, and through pestering Sugar enough, takes Randy's cookie, the final cookie on the tray, and hands it to Matty, leaving him with nothing. Susie gets a bath and stays in it for only a few minutes before leaving, which Sugar erupts at her for, however supposedly she couldn't contain herself, hence why she left early. Kenny sends Bob to exile, taking his money, and begins the arc of Kenny just refusing to outbid people despite having the funds to do so. That being said, it does lead to one of the best liners where Sugar asks if Kenny bought the bath, she would have snuggled with him, and he asks her if she would snuggle with a rich man as he villainously flicks through his notes. At 11, I put the other tribe auction, Survivor Thailand, and for anyone wondering, I'm just including the auction as whatever happens at the auction site, which is unfortunate considering Jan and Clay's moment beforehand. There is also a mutiny, but it ultimately leads to nothing. We start out with Jeff revealing burger and fries, and neither tribe begins bidding, which is hilarious because you can see Jeff is bamboozled. Soup Jai get baked grubs, and it's fun seeing Stephanie and Cheyenne nonchalantly eating them, contrasting Aaron, who's terrified of them. Probably the most iconic part of this auction comes from Jeff trying to get Jan to say margaritas, but her and Helen fail time after time, from beer to tacos to enchiladas being gassed. But in spite of the unique tribe twist to Survivor US and some very strong character moments, it does have its slow points, landing it outside of the top 10. On the topic of top 10, we have Survivor Oneworld. Now, I know I'm a bigger Sabrina fan than most people, but this auction has many funny ad-libs from her, telling Tarzan not to stare when Kim gets in the shower, and mockingly saying well done Troy when he gets an advantage, and accuses the tribe of being against him. We have Kim in the shower bidding on peanut butter and chocolate. Alicia gets a lovely moment when receiving her letters, offsetting her unlikable personality in the main show, and Tarzan tells Jeff he's just going to keep the $500 to repair the shocks on his truck. But the main line comes from Kat, purchasing a BLT, only to exclaim, "Yo, there's bacon on that!" which is one of the best lines ever due to Kat's unawareness initially of what a BLT stands for. That being said, while it has these fantastic moments, the auction does have a few slow points at the start. Past that is Australian Survivor Champions vs Contenders, with some incredible character moments. Sam goes ape over getting his chalky milk, even threatening to break Shane's leg if she accidentally knocked it over. He then tries to kiss Robbie to let him experience the chalky milk. Shane gets the beggar's table, where she can beg for parts of people's meals, and plays into the archetype of an overly sweet old lady. Fenella gets poached eggs on toast, with an underrated line of "I love bread" when running at Jonathan. Brian gets rice without utensils, so he just slams his face into the bowl. Shawnee buys a jar of sweets for $500, but notices a clue, and so we get the heist scene of her guarding it with lollies so no one can see it, which is an exciting moment. Brian gets a bed, to which Shane, in her eternal sweetness, points out there's 2 pillows and dives onto him. And sure, there are parts that are skipped over, like Lydia's pizza, but it's not like the Worlds Apart or Tocantins auctions, where it was chopped up and changing the edit to just leaving these items out, and even in spite of it, makes for an entertaining auction. The Micronesia auction contains many great moments, like Natalie sending Jason to exile while saying, "I don't know why he's tripping," with Jason begging her not to send him again. Saray at the beginning of the auction tries to pull a fast one, underpaying Jeff. Both Eric and Saray have amusing little food dances. You have the girls going crazy over PB&J while Saray is laughing in the background. Natalie passes up bat soup, only for James to happily eat it, and I love his process of explaining how he'll tackle it to Jeff. Natalie gets cake for herself and 3 others, with a funny, less remembered line where she tells him she's annoyed and to let her have the cake. We have the notable moment of Eric bidding $40 to lick Saray's fingers, but to me it was always gross seeing someone sucking the saliva-stained fingers of another person. The first ever Australian Survivor auction is up next, and they did a really good job. Connor buys drinks for Sue as well as Christy and Kate, tying back to their arc of not winning a reward. We have some fun Nick moments like him pestering Connor about how crunchy the chips are and watching him eat the gooey chocolate cake he paid $440 for. Him and Sam have a bidding war where they snipe each other constantly at the last second. Nick, much like Lee, gets an advantage at the auction, and it's a complete juxtaposition to the US auction, as both these men are rather disappointed, whereas the Americans would be tripping over themselves for these advantages. Brooke also gets a bath, and it's funny seeing her get unclothed while saying, "Oh, this is awkward." This is also the most people we've had at a Survivor auction, with 13, presenting some positives and more competitive bidding and better character interaction, although there are some people that are ignored and don't even cast a bid in the edit. At 6, with its only entry, is Survivor New Zealand and its second season Thailand. Now the issue I have is extremely high increments of 50 in the auction, meaning if someone bids over you, you have to bid at least $100 extra than you originally did, making the bidding a bit more rigid and short. However, this auction in spite of that is really great thanks to Dave's arc throughout the auction, wanting food and increasingly becoming more and more distressed at the meals people are getting. We also have people like Matt playing into this trope by eating crisps about 2 inches from his ear, as well as the host mocking him for not spending of his money. He eventually bids $300 just to get an advantage, which was what he originally wanted and did need, but further plays into Dave's misfortune of going hungry. Adam is also great during his pizza scene and freaking out when the host says he doesn't know what flavour it is, which is even more funny as you can tell Adam doesn't like the pizza, and in spite of acting super joyful as the one on camera, he is staring into the abyss, eating it for the remainder of the auction. But finally we have Dave, very reminiscent to Shane Powers, shoveling handfuls of cake into his mouth and asking the host if he can keep it at the end. Now into the top 5 with Cook Islands, and let's face it, it's Ozzy, Candice, Yule, Penner and Parvati in an auction. It's going to be good. Firstly, Penner is an absolute ham at this auction, getting a hot dog and a glass of beer which he spills over Adam. He also gets a toothbrush and toothpaste at the auction, where Jeff asks him if he has enough, and Jonathan, in a humorous manner, responds, "I just bid it," and even gives him a $20 tip. Ozzy bids $4.20 on an ice cream machine, with Jeff saying, "Yep, that's the magic number," and Ozzy wins the ice cream machine only to squirt himself between the legs. Parvati gets a bath and chocolate cake, beginning the trajectory for the young attractive woman getting the baths/showers. Yule and Becky pool money for an advantage, which really kills any other ideas of pooling money due to advantages, as I think production realised at this point it was too unfair. However, this does add to the arc of Candice going to exile again and again. At the end of the auction, Yule remarks, "If this is the end, I'm going to jump off a bridge," which is just funny coming from this otherwise extremely cerebral player. A great auction, only harmed by the unfair nature of the exile twist. Now at 4, it's the Russell Show, aka Samoa, and to switch things up, my only flaw with this auction is the fact we get lots of confessionals from the likes of Russell. Jason's worked because it explained his rationale for bidding on the advantage, but for me, Russell and John's confessionals really break up the momentum. However, despite that, it's a great auction with a lot of fun moments. We have Russell being wrong about thinking there are 2 bad items back to back. On the topic of that bad item, Shambu gets it, where it turns out to be sea noodles and slug guts, only for her to ask Jeff if it has nutritional starch value, which he's bewildered by. Natalie automatically bids $200 in PB&J, immediately getting that item, and to round out the auction, John gets apple pie that he decides to keep rather than share, stating they won't vote me out over pie, which is certainly ironic considering the outcome of this episode. Taking bronze is the Amazon. While we do get the return of set starting prices, they are on the lower end, resulting in at least some bidding. Rob, as per expected, has some great one-liners like saying that's a lot of schnol to Alex and the world's most expensive candy bar to Jenna getting chocolate and peanut butter, obviously synergizing with her and Heidi earlier in the season. We have Alex hilariously trying to convince the tribe as much as himself really. He's going to enjoy the maniac. Later he gets a steak and it's so weird but I find it hilarious. There's this serial killer-esque music playing as he's slicing into the steak, then cutting to Rob deeply concerned. Butch probably gets the most iconic line with his breakfast item, wherein Jeff asks him if he likes to eat breakfast, and Butch says with the wife and kids at home, as if they brought his entire house and family onto the island as something extra. Nonetheless, Jeff tries to probe him and eventually just gives up and hands him his bed sheets as the extra item. Production very clearly tries giving Jenna the letter from home, only for Heidi, knowing the situation with her mother and being her closest friend, beginning to bid against her, but it is nice seeing Jenna eventually get it. Now at 2, we talked about Australia being a pretty low tier auction, but the auction after, Africa takes a second place. This is what an auction should be. I like it as more informal than other auctions, with T-Bird convincing Jeff to uncover an item, Kim Johnson is allowed to have her own mini auction to sell a piece of chicken that Jeff even plays along with, Tom fakes out the fellow contestants, making them think Jeff screwed him. There's many fun lines such as T-Bird's good enough to make you want to slap your mama, and Tom's he's a Jew and he won't eat the ham, that while obviously controversial, is the result of Tom, in my opinion, just saying what he's thinking rather than trying to be rude. Tom and Ethan try bidding Kim for a sundae, where Jeff asks if the two guys are good and Tom says no, wanting Kim to have the item, but Ethan bids and Tom's brain implodes. Tom also has a great moment getting a pint of beer and dancing everywhere near the beginning. However, there are a few small nitpicks, including Tom getting his beer for 1,000 shillings, 3,000 below the asking price, and the use of shilling using hundreds and thousands rather than the hundreds or tens, which I personally find to be easier to follow along with. But again, an incredible auction. However, at number 1, my favourite auction of them all is from Australian Survivor 2017. We continue the already stated boons that Australian Survivor has, such as its intense editing as well as JLP being amazing. There are also a lot of competitive bids. Luke buys himself out of the auction only to read the rest of the scroll where he's bought a table where he gets everything, and it's glorious seeing the rest of the cast 180 their emotions in the span of about 5 seconds. Within this we also get Ziggy's iconic "Are you kidding me" line. Luke was really the perfect person to get this reward, with his constant "oh yeah boys" and general demeanour of looking like a kid in a candy shop. Jonathan pulls out a massive cheesecake, which Henry bids 100 for, only to produce a tiny glass of champagne, which, and only then, because of this tiny glass, causes Henry to go to 500, which is just a funny moment to me. Sarah bids $500 on a covered item, which turns out to be a coconut, further helped by Luke amidst his banquet, telling her it's not that bad actually. Lockie and Michelle go to Rocks for a burrito, Tara and Luke get to call their families, and Jericho and Peter bid for an item in such quick succession that the host can't keep up. Jericho bids all his money on an advantage, only for Pete to one-up him, and I find it hilarious he stuffed his face with a burger, saying he can't go on or he'll be bankrupt. We have a fun showdown between Tessa and Jericho, where Jericho knows she has $500 and can outbid him, so he bids all his money. We have Tessa picking Michelle for the reason she got a rock, whereas Sarah paid $500 for a coconut, and it's also great seeing Luke, fat and happy, also excited about getting to go on the reward. Pretty much every item has some entertainment around it, and so that makes it for me, thus resulting in it taking the number 1 spot. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed them, make sure to subscribe. On my left is a video talking about the top 5 Survivor challenges that almost ended their contestants. A video I handpicked for you, and I'm sure you will love. Nonetheless, have a great day, and peace!